Well, the South African government says it's noted President Trump's announcement. The Department of Trade and Industry says it is studying the proclamations and its implications for the country's domestic industry. The department says it's fully engaged with the matter and continues to have discussions with the U.S. on this issue, and a formal submission will also be made to the U.S. as is provided for in the proclamations. Prof Stremlau, Professor of International Relations at Witwatersrand University. Now, Professor Stremlau, thank you so much for joining us. Is this what Americans expected to hear today?
Well, Americans are shocked, at least I am shocked, perhaps not surprised given the behavior patterns of Donald Trump, that he would take on a trading regime which has been evolving successfully for 80 years. I know that it's often hard for smaller countries, including South Africa, to get a fair deal, but at least there's a framework for negotiating in good faith, as has been done over the years, including the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is very important to the South African economy in terms of special access to the U.S., and Donald Trump is putting all of this up into the air for no apparent sensible reason. And I can explain a little bit of the contradictions, but if I was sitting in the South African government tonight, I would really be scratching my head. So I think they gave the right response.
Now, Prof, is this action guaranteed to produce jobs as Donald Trump has spoken of?
Absolutely not. When George W. Bush attempted similar tariffs, the estimates were that he may have protected a few tens of thousands of jobs, but lost 400,000 jobs in the manufacturing that depends on imported steel. And what they're talking about in the U.S. is that while he may save 20,000 steel jobs temporarily, and steel is a declining industry and it's going to be an automated industry, he may save those jobs, but he's going to lose 40,000 jobs in the automobile industry alone, and we're not sure what these tariffs really amount to because, as your lead-in said, the Canadians, who are the biggest steel suppliers to the United States, are being exempted. What Donald Trump has shown is chaos, uncertainty, and a lot of nervousness on the part of America's trading partners, including South Africa.
Now, Prof, there's already been a threat of retaliatory action. What do you think should happen? What do you think the EU should rather consider? Should everyone go back to the negotiating table and have talks about this, or is this decision final? Is Donald Trump not going to backtrack with the backlash that's coming out?
I'm really regretful that I have to discuss this in these terms, but with Donald Trump, you never know when something is definite and when it gets compromised, changed, or he wakes up on the other side of the bed and has a different opinion. I do want to stress, however, that in this case, he has been against trade since the 1980s and fearful that the U.S. is losing advantage. Now, bear in mind that his businesses, whether it's beauty pageants or golf courses or real estate, is not trade and manufacturing. There's no understanding of basic economic principles, why we have trading regimes to give confidence to manufacturers and to countries. The trading regimes that we have are not to favor one or the other. They're to try to get an agreement on how to manage potential conflicts, and they evolve slowly and through patient negotiations, and as I say, for 80 years have. So we don't know whether he'll change his mind. He's already changed his mind on exempting Canada and Mexico within the framework of a very confusing challenge to the North American Free Trade Association, which I was part of in the negotiations back in the 90s. And so, again, it is confusing. I do want to stress, however, that I fear that this kind of issue, if it's not handled carefully by Africans, could ignite some sort of a reaction against the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is very important to give African exporters untariffed access, free access to American markets.
Professor Stremlau, how do you think South Africa should react to this news? You mentioned the fact that their reaction today and just going through everything before coming out and giving out a statement, what should their plan of action be going forward in dealing with this proclamation?
As I said, I think acting cautiously, studying the issue, quietly trying to find out as much as they can from whoever seems to be still in power. You know, the chief economic advisor, Gary Cohen, resigned. But there's an aspect to this that I think the South African government might consider. I'm always reluctant to be too prescriptive, but there is an issue involving the Ugandans and the Burundians and the Rwandans, which is over used clothing. The American exporters of used clothing are accused of flooding the markets in these Central African countries, and they are protesting and trying to do some tariff reaction. That is right in the middle of the African Growth and Opportunity Act. South Africa went through this process in a very difficult and patient way on chicken, remember, which I didn't think was a fair issue for the Americans to raise the way they did, but politically they did. So South Africa has experience in negotiating, admittedly, with a responsible government of Barack Obama, which is very different from Trump. But I don't like the idea that the African countries are raising the clothing issue right now, given the high stakes of trying to protect and not draw attention to the African Growth and Opportunity Act, because it does favor African exporters, and Donald Trump does not like any agreement that favors exporters over the U.S.
Now, Prof, just looking at countries like Japan and their reaction with regards to also requesting for an exemption from the tariffs, stating the fact that it will impact negatively on the economy. Do you think that President Donald Trump would consider that for a country like Japan? And if what would it mean going forward for other countries? Could they also request for an exemption?
Well, of course. And that's what the Canadians and the Mexicans did. But I want to stress again that African countries are in a particularly awkward position because the Congress has approved an extension till 2025 of the concession that gives African products free entry into U.S. markets without having to go through all the complex negotiations. They took place in establishing the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And for South Africa, for example, its automobile exports into the U.S. market, BMWs and Mercedes, are very important for jobs in the economy here. I was speaking with someone from the Treasury just yesterday about this, and they are real concessions that matter to the South African economy. And I fear that Donald Trump, as unpredictable and reactive as he is, if he discovers this, because I don't think he even knows about it probably, that would be a problem. So I hope that the Africans can quietly discuss how do we manage this guy, and in order to protect what we already have. The Congress is on record as supporting that, but there are opportunities that he could use or levers that he could use to challenge it if he was in a mind to do so. Then you would protest that you're violating an agreement that was already negotiated. Whether it would be successful, I don't know. But for now, be very careful and watch him carefully because he's so unpredictable. And I pray that everything is okay for African economies because these are important concessions that the U.S. negotiated over many years with African countries.
Prof, looking at the time frames, 15 days to start the implementation of tariffs on imports, a very quick turnaround. What do you think is prompting this?
Well, what's prompting it is it's only steel and aluminum. And what it matters was that most of the steel is coming in from Canada, where the Americans have a very big surplus anyway in trade. Somehow Trump seemed to think this was going to punish the Chinese, and it's made everybody very angry. The Chinese are dumpers of steel. All governments know that. That's just the way they're functioning right now. But the U.S. is not a victim of that dumping because it's worked out an agreement with the Canadians. And I don't know all that. I'm not a steel expert, but it's steel and aluminum. The fear is that this will be contagious and lead to reaction and set off a trade war. That's the danger. This is a real danger. And so therefore, the next 15 days for those countries affected, not Africa, but Africa could be collateral damage. And that's why I mentioned the issue that the Burundians and the Kenyans, I think the Kenyans, the Ugandans, the Rwandans have raised. I wish they'd be quiet right now and not stir up the pot and let the Europeans and the Canadians and the other big traders with America push hard against this, and let the Republicans in Congress who don't like what Trump has done, as well as the Democrats who don't like what Trump has done, and see whether we can rein them in. As your lead story said, he's also got the Korean issue now on the plate. So this is a time for real caution and trying not to make an issue of what is an advantageous situation for the African economies.
Professor Stremlau, thank you so much for joining us. This is a developing story, and as you mentioned, he still has that meeting with the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. We'll leave it there for now.